This year, the US has already conducted a regime change operation in Venezuela, kidnapping its president, Nicolas Maduro, and war is, of course, raging in Iran. But is Cuba next? For more than 2 months now, the US has been imposing an oil embargo on the socialist-run island, which is leading to blackouts and putting its people and government under great pressure. In this episode, I'm joined by the astrologer Wade Caves, and we're going to dig into the astrology of Cuba and see what it tells us about what might be coming later this year. This is World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. In this episode, we're going to be exploring the astrology of Cuba and in particular, considering what might be coming for that country this year. And there's good reason to think something big is indeed in the post. Countries already being strangled by an oil embargo put in place after the US kidnapped the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro.
We're hearing in the news people like Lindsey Graham, who's, a very active political figure in at least a few respects, making a comment that Cuba's next.
US President Donald Trump seems to want regime change in Cuba, or at least massive concessions from its government to force it into alignment with US interests.
Trump administration released a national security strategy that was focused very much on hemispheres of power, hemispheres of control. And all eyes got set on Latin America, South America, Central America.
Here's what he said about this earlier in March.
As we achieve a historic transformation in Venezuela, we're also looking forward to the great change that will soon be coming to Cuba. Cuba's at the end of the line. I would think a deal would be made very easily with Cuba.
So you don't need astrology to see that something big is coming in Cuba this year, but astrology can give us clues about what that'll look like and when things are likely to materialize. In this episode, I'm mostly going to give the floor to Wade. Now, Wade is a very accomplished practitioner and teacher of traditional astrology, and in particular, Renaissance-style astrology as practiced by people like William Lilly. This approach is a bit different to what you may be used to seeing on this channel, so I just wanted to introduce some of the techniques we'll be seeing here before we get going. One of the differences to be aware of is that Wade uses the Regiomontanus house system, which is a quadrant house system, and his approach is to cast quite a lot of charts, including solar ingresses, eclipses, and other lunations, conjunctions, as well as natal charts to see when transits and eclipses and moons are triggering them. So it's a complex, very thorough approach that for brevity's sake, we can't present in its full form here. As you'll be aware, in mundane astrology, we can use Aries ingress charts, meaning charts cast for the moment that the sun enters the sign of Aries in a country's capital city to make prognostications for the year ahead for that country. But in traditional astrology, a chart cast for the Aries ingress before a leader takes power can be used to signify that leader's rule or administration.
There are two charts that I think we probably want to reference when we talk about Fidel Castro's ascent and the setting up of his government. And these charts are still very much active today. The first is the Aries ingress in 1958. In 1958, for most of 1958, Fidel Castro and the revolutionaries were fighting the Cuban Revolution. It was a multi-year war. It wasn't something that resolved terribly quickly, but it was in January of 1959, and that was when Castro stepped in and Batista was removed from power. Now, we look at the Aries ingress charts that precede moments like that because what it shows are leaders who come into positions of power, people who step into position of leadership. You can use this technique for anybody who could be called a leader. So that includes CEOs or heads of multinational organizations. It's not just state leaders and people who run governments.
So we can get a chart for the Castro administration and indeed for socialist Cuba in general by casting a chart for the Aries ingress in Havana that came in March of 1958.
This chart has a couple of notable features. The first is the opposition between Mars and Uranus. I mean, that particular opposition, Mars ruling the ascendant Scorpio. So you can see that the nation throughout the course of this year was going to be embroiled in a number of military operations. Now, remember, Aries ingresses are true for the entire world. So this is, very specific to Cuba only in the sense that the angles are set up for Cuba. But every country in the world would have started out that astrological year with the Mars-Uranus opposition. It's just that not every country in the world elected or brought a leader into power in that year. Those who did will have then brought the symbolism of the Mars-Uranus opposition onto that particular administration, that particular regime. Mars-Uranus in opposition, it gets highly combustible, volatile, and these degrees will become important as we will see soon. The Aries ingress is always going to have the sun at 0 Aries, so that's not by definition. So there's nothing particularly unique about that. Except to say, one of my favorite things in mundane astrology is to see a strong 5th house emphasis when we're talking about the fall of leaders. Because, yes, it's true, Fidel Castro came into power in this year, but it was on the fall of the leader who came before. This is like an 8th house type symbolism, 8th house being suggestive of death and falls and things coming to a close and coming to an end. So when we see the sun in the 5th house, you might ask yourself, well, that's the 5th house. It's not the 8th. But if you were to start with the 10th house, which is the house for the head of state. So coming into this Aries ingress in March of 1958, Batista was still in power. So the sun describes him actually in the initial part of the year. And if you were to count, you would find that the 5th is 8 houses on from the 10th.
But there's another astrological event that we can look at if we want a chart to represent a government, and that's the last new or full moon that appeared before that government took power.
So here's the second chart we'll use for Castro's ascent, which is going to be in January of 1959. In fact, this particular full moon took place in December, but it was January 1st when Fidel Castro took over of 1959. So this is actually a couple of days before. But the new and full moons that happen before any major event are really important for understanding the climate, the astrological climate that kind of brought this out, played midwife, brought it into fruition. And in this chart, there are a couple of really strong themes. We see a reinforcement of the Mars-Uranus signature. They're in square with each other now. And also, it's an opposition with Jupiter. So a number of things we could say about that, like, Jupiter being a planet we associate with commerce, Jupiter being in Scorpio, showing the difficulty at the very least with imports and exports, certainly with that Mars opposition. But all of this, this Uranus has now come to the midheaven of the Aries ingress. So if we were just mundane astrologers predicting what was going to happen in the year, and we noticed that at some point Uranus was going to come to the midheaven of our Aries ingress, that would raise a couple of flags, especially if at the same time Mars was coming by square. So this is the astrology that's like deeply embedded into Castro's ascent in the 1950s.
We'll come back to this chart later in the video. Before that, we're going to see a powerful example of one of these administration charts in action, and it relates to the war in Iran that began on February the 28th. As forecast on this channel, that war began at a typically violent square between Uranus and Mars at 28 degrees of Aquarius, which is the degree of the solar eclipse that took place on February the 17th of this year. But as we did earlier with Castro's Cuba, you can also create a chart for Trump's second administration, which is represented by the Aries ingress chart for March of 2024, which is before he took power.
Many astrologers will have noted that when the US and Israel first made their strikes on Iran, there was obviously the solar eclipse that happened on the US moon. The first strike happened when Mars passed over that degree. But what I didn't hear anybody picking up on was that this was actually all being built and predicated on Mars on the 4th house cusp of Trump's administration astrology. And you can also see in this same signature that we had, Fidel Castro comes in on a year when the 10th ruler, the sun, is in the 5th or the turned 8th. We see the same thing happening in the Trump administration chart. So perhaps a little foreshadowing about the possibility of what could happen throughout this time. There's a couple of things that really need to get brought to our attention. The first is that the second Trump administration moon at 3 degrees of Leo is right on that Uranus-Mars opposition that we identified in the very first chart. in the Aries ingress from 1958. And then the Jupiter in this chart, the seventh house. Now, that seventh house emphasis it's very important for us because it's the people we name as our enemies. It's the people that we go into business and contract with as well. It's not all negative, but in this kind of context, it's the people that we are declaring hostile to the state, for instance. So Jupiter on the seventh, you would have almost thought that there would be, a number of peacemaking deals made as a result of this administration, except it doesn't really work like that. We have to see what it touches and what it connects with. So this Jupiter is right on the Fidel Castro Mars-Jupiter opposition. In fact, that Mars-Jupiter opposition falls right on the Trump administration's ascendant-descendant axis, which is actually more or less the same as the ascendant-descendant axis for the 1958 Aries ingress. When you see something like that, where the same degrees are activating, what's happening is it's like these two individuals, they are responsive to the same triggers, they're responsive to the same transits. So the point of interest for me is the way in which, this Mars signature, Uranus signature is getting continually reinforced with the Trump administration astrology. And we'll come into it in a minute, but the 25 Leo midheaven remember that Fidel Castro's is 19 Leo, so 25 Leo is not far away. Both of those degrees are going to be relevant to us in a little while.
So there's some essential groundwork. The thing you need to know now is that just as February's solar eclipse signified the coming of the Iran war, so another eclipse seems to augur ill for Cuba. If you're enjoying this video so far, please click the like button down there and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks. On August the 12th of 2026, we'll see a solar eclipse at 20 degrees of Leo. And this eclipse looks like it will have big implications for Cuba. Just as we did for the Castro and Trump administrations, we can cast a chart for the current Cuban government. This chart is taken for the Aries ingress of 2021 before the current president of Cuba, Miguel Diaz-Canel, took power.
So this is the Diaz-Canel administration chart, which has Leo right on the seventh house cusp, which from his point of view is going to be pointing to those who are our enemies, our declared enemies, those who are working against us. So this degree is showing up over and over and over again. And the reason why I'm nervous about that is because we have an eclipse that's coming at 20 degrees of Leo in August of this year, because now that conjunction is happening on this seventh house cusp. It's happening on the Castro midheaven at the time when his regime was set up, and in the Aries ingress for this coming astrological year, which starts first day of Northern Hemisphere spring, March 21st, and it runs of 2026, and it runs until 2027. Look at the degree that's on the IC. So the fourth house is like our land, our territory. You see something happening on the fourth house cusp, and you expect militarized action in your home, on your homeland. In the Trump administration chart, we have Mars on the IC, and that's exactly what we've experienced, is the unleashing of the National Guard. So it's quite an intense signature to experience. And Diaz-Canel has that Mars in the fourth house as well. So all of the symbolism is, kind of pointing in this direction of likely activity to come in the back half of 2026.
I'd also note that in that 2026 Aries ingress for Cuba, the most angular planet by far is Uranus, which is right on the ascendant at 28 degrees of Taurus. Uranus on the ascendant suggests to me the possibility of serious disruption to the general conditions of the country and the welfare of the people. And Uranus is close to the fixed star Algol, the head of the Medusa, often a signifier of decapitation, usually figuratively. What we've seen lately with Uranus close to Algol are a number of high-profile figurative decapitations of states and organizations, including those of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, the Mexican cartel leader El Mencho, and most recently Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. One would have to wonder if Cuba might be in line for similar treatment. All right, so there are plenty of charts being triggered by this eclipse, but in my experience, solar eclipses can come into effect weeks in advance. And a few weeks before that eclipse, there's something else happening that looks like it might have explosive implications for Cuba. In late June and early July of this year, we'll see a conjunction of Mars and Uranus, a combination that often brings conflict and explosive events. And this conjunction is directly hitting the chart of the Diaz-Canel administration.
We have a Mars-Uranus conjunction coming to hit the IC there. It'll be around 4 degrees of Gemini, so that's going to be exactly between the IC, exactly between Mars. It is entirely possible that we could see something happen before. You'll notice in the eclipse at August 26th, the Mars-Uranus conjunction, which will happen down here, will have already passed. It's entirely possible that we don't have to wait for the eclipse for something to happen. Something could happen much sooner, But if nothing happens from the Mars-Uranus conjunction with Cuba, this particular eclipse reopens the door for something to occur.
So it's pretty clear that something is indeed going to happen in Cuba this year, something disruptive for that country. And there's one last thing happening this year that seems very relevant to all of this, a triple conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, and the South Node. In the bonus section of this video, available for members of the channel, we discuss this conjunction, why it might bode ill for President Trump in Cuba, and why it could bring Russia into the picture, as happened in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I have to think something goes terribly wrong here, very wrong. Regulus generally gets a norm of like around 5 degrees. Does also tend to bring people to great heights and then destroy them at the very last moment. That's the usual thing that happens. Trump has this rising. His administration has it on the midheaven.
Before we go, though, there's something we want to tell you about, which is this year's World Astrology Summit, which both Wade and I, as well as a ton of other astrologers, will be speaking at.
This is the World Astrology Summit. This is an online conference. It is recorded. We have 20 different astrologers who will be presenting on a range of different topics as well. We've got the prospectus available so you can see who will be speaking. We've got a number of different countries represented. So some people will be giving talks that are based on local astrology. So for instance, Josh Hancock will be focusing on the Australian political landscape. We have Christine Skinner, who's going to be talking about global finance. Rod Chang, who's going to be talking about China and Taiwan. I'm going to be partnering with a Kenyan researcher named Njoki Ngumi, and we're going to be looking at resources in U.S.-Africa diplomacy. We've got a talk on the World Cup, Brazil's election, natural disaster astrology, UK, South Africa, and BRICS.
I'll be speaking about Russian history and its remarkable resonances with the Saturn-Neptune cycle. If you want to get a big picture view of where the world is heading, learn a ton about mundane astrology, and listen to some of the world's best astrologers, then this conference is for you. The viewers of this channel can get a discount on the usual entry fee.
If you're coming to us from this podcast, go ahead and give yourself the discount rate. You can go ahead and click on the SkyScript Patreon member registration. And when you come in, just make a mention, how did you hear about the summit? And you can say the World Astrology Report. So you'll get a 15% discount on registration if you're coming through Dan's channel.
All right. Thanks so much to Wade for joining me in this video. Do seek him out.
I can be found on my website, wadecaves.com. I'm also starting to get a little bit more active on Instagram, which is also just Wade Caves, my first and last name. And I teach for the School of Traditional Astrology. So if you are interested in learning horary or specialist applications of astrology, I do teach there, and there is a course on mundane astrology that I offer through the school. You can visit us at sta.co.
Thanks for watching, and see you again on the channel very soon.